Now let's take a look at the period known as the Second Cold War, a period of renewed aggression between the two countries, primarily coming from America and the policies of Ronald Reagan. So let's have a look at why détente ends and why this period known as the Second World War begins. Well, it begins with the origins. The origins of this are the invasion of Afghanistan, or rather the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. Just a little bit of backstory on this. In November of 1979, in Tehran, Iran, the American embassy had been captured by Muslim fundamentalists, and the general American public opinion was that this made them seem weak. These hostages were held for over a year, and America had effectively been left powerless to do anything about it. So in November of 1979, American public opinion is already starting to change and think we need to deal tougher with any and all foreign threats to America. As part of this revolution in Iran, the Iranian leadership was replaced by Muslim fundamentalists. The concern here from the Soviet Union's point of view is that they fearful that Muslims in Russia would now follow suit and would also try to stage a revolution in the Soviet Union. Therefore, they want to establish or reaffirm Afghanistan as their buffer zone. Effectively, the Soviet Union is worried that this Muslim revolution in Iran will spread to Afghanistan and then into the Soviet Union, because religion transcends borders. So now we need to take a second to understand why the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan. So obviously it wants it as the buffer zone, as we've discussed. So let's have a look at why the Soviet Union has such an interest in Afghanistan. Well, going back in time, in April 78, a pro-Soviet government had taken control of Afghanistan. So at this point, in April 1978, the Soviet Union has influence in Afghanistan. It's effectively a puppet satellite state. It has massive influence there. The problem is, in September of 1979, this pro-Soviet government was toppled and replaced by Hafizullah Amin in an uprising. So Hafizullah Amin is now in charge of Afghanistan. And at first, the Soviets think that he is somebody he can work with. However, what Amin does, he introduces oppressive policies in Afghanistan, which makes the people of Afghanistan unhappy and starts to cause revolts. The issue with this is you've already had an uprising in Iran, and now Amin's policies in Afghanistan are causing unrest there. So what does Amin do? Well, in December of 1979, it's believed that Amin was said to have been seeking the US support to quash the rebellions in Afghanistan. This is the final straw for the Soviet Union. Soviet forces invade Afghanistan and Amin was assassinated, and then he is replaced by the Soviet Union. They put a Soviet government in place led by Babrak Kemal, effectively a puppet they can control. He's going to try to introduce reforms to keep the people of Afghanistan happier, or rather less likely to rebel and re-establish law and order in the country and make it a buffer zone against Muslim fundamentalists. So the problem here is this expands the buffer zone of the Soviet Union, and Basket 1 of the Helsinki Accords had been violated. Détente has to end. America is now going to take on a more aggressive foreign policy, starting with the Carter Doctrine. President Carter and his cabinet withdraw SALT II, the agreement that they had previously made but hadn't been passed yet by Congress, and increases spending on arms. As we see throughout the course, anytime tensions increase, so does military spending. So what Carter does, or what the Carter Doctrine says, is that the USA would repel by force, if necessary, any threat to American interest in the Persian Gulf. This is clearly a more aggressive foreign policy from America than ever before. America that also begins supplying weapons and money to the Mujahideen to fight the Soviet Union. The Mujahideen were the Afghan guerrilla fighters who were fighting off the Soviet Union. The Afghan war ends up costing the Soviet Union around $8 billion per year. The Afghan war effectively becomes the Soviet Union's version of Vietnam. They're fighting against guerrilla fighters, and it's an unwinnable money pit of a war. What this leads to then is the obvious end of détente and the souring of relations between the two countries, as shown by the Olympics boycotts in 1980 and 1984. So in 1980, you get the Moscow Olympics, which the USA lead a boycott of along with other NATO countries. So boycott means to not take part in something. So 1980, the Olympics are going to take place in Moscow, but America and other NATO countries say, we're not going to come. Some countries allowed athletes to compete, but not for countries. America, however, told their athletes that their passports would be confiscated if they tried to go. The reason why this is so powerful is because the Soviets had wanted to use the event as propaganda to show how well-run communism worked and show off their country. Obviously, it's less of a spectacle and it's less impressive if the best athletes aren't there, so it damages Soviet propaganda. The fact that other NATO countries also refuse to join America's boycott shows that the USA has a clear influence over the rest of Europe, and it undermines the Soviet Union. It makes them look silly. So what did the Soviet Union do in response? Well, it's very simple. The next Olympics in 1984 are supposed to be in Los Angeles, so the USSR and 15 communist countries boycott the LA Olympics. This obviously is worsening relations between the countries and heightened tensions. From December of 1979 onwards, this is the period known as the Second Cold War. What it also leads to, this end of détente and this renewed aggression between the countries, is the election of Ronald Reagan. If you take a look at the map of America in the background, Ronald Reagan promised to be aggressive towards communism and end the Cold War. And what you can see in the background there on the map are the number of states which voted for Reagan. The red states are ones which voted for Reagan. He wins the American presidential by a landslide with the promise of being tough on communism. Therefore, this shows that the American public supported being tough on communism and ending détente. This brings in the Reagan Doctrine. Ronald Reagan was elected president in November 1980, promising to be tough on communism, winning in a landslide victory, and clearly the American public agreed. This strained relations between the countries. We're back to the Truman Doctrine, containment, don't let the Russians spread, don't let communism spread, and he's going to increase spending on the military. Forget our domestic issues, forget all the stuff we spoke about before. We're going to fight communism again. That's where our priority is now. This leads to rollbacks, an expansion on the Truman Doctrine. This says the USA would actively support anti-communist government and anti-communist government groups trying to overthrow communist governments. This means effectively, we'll give you money if you want to fight off communist governments. So again, it's an expansion, or rather a development of the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine was containment, we won't let it spread. Now we're into rollbacks where it's we will give money to fight communist governments. As part of that, it means sending weapons to Afghanistan to arm the Mujahideen. What does this mean for relations between the countries? Well, Reagan deals in absolutes. He describes the USSR, the Soviet Union, as an evil empire and a threat to America and the West. Relations had been getting better in the 70s during détente, but in the 80s, they have clearly worsened. Again, this belief in the policy of peace through strength. Reagan effectively says, we're going to be so powerful, there will be peace. This leads him to introduce in 1983 the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, or Star Wars. This is Reagan's great bluff. Basically goes on TV and he announces that American scientists have developed the technology by which they can put satellites in space which have laser beams which can shoot down nuclear weapons. This effect, if it was true, it would establish nuclear superiority. It means that the Soviet Union can't keep up at a time when they're already stretched, spending all their money on the Afghan war. And now America comes out and says, we now have nuclear superiority. What this does is this further increases pressure on the Soviet Union in the arms race due to their economic situation. As I've just mentioned, they're spending loads of money on the Afghan war, and now they would have to try and keep up with America. With this, they can't. The communist Soviet Union is running out of money. What Reagan said was he could place a series of satellites in orbit that had lasers capable of shooting down Soviet missiles, even the multiple re-entry missiles, and they have anti-ballistic missiles. This makes Russia seem very, very far behind. The truth of it is, the system itself is actually a long way from being ready to implement. It's not ready yet, but Reagan, when he announces it, makes it seem like it is ready. The consequences of this are worsening relations between the countries, and Russia want to catch up but don't have the money required. Russia simply cannot compete, and this will lead to the introduction of Gorbachev's new thinking. So effectively what Reagan is doing here is he's bluffing, he's talking about this technology as if it is ready now, but really it's a long way off being ready. But it makes it look like they are a long way ahead in the nuclear arms race, and the Soviet Union realized there is no way we can keep up with this.